Sinister Stories.
On the cusp of Halloween night, the air buzzed with anticipation as the Halloween-themed cruise ship, decorated with scary decorations, set sail into the darkness of the open sea. On board, passengers eagerly donned their most eerie costumes, ready to revel in the festivities of the night. Among them were Greg and Darcy, a couple who had recently become empty nesters as their last child had flown the coop. Greg and Darcy had been looking forward to this vacation for months, finally able to enjoy some time alone after years of raising their children. As they stepped onto the deck of the ship, dressed in matching pirate costumes, they couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement mingled with nostalgia for the days when their children were still at home. The cruise ship was a sight to behold, with every deck transformed into a Halloween wonderland. Cobwebs adorned the railings, jack-o'-lanterns flickered with an otherworldly glow, and the sound of eerie music echoed through the halls. As the night wore on, Greg and Darcy found themselves swept up in the festivities, dancing and mingling with fellow passengers dressed as witches, vampires, and ghouls. The ship seemed alive with energy, pulsating with the thrill of the Halloween spirit. But as the clock struck midnight, the mood aboard the ship began to shift. A sense of unease settled over the passengers, whispers of something sinister lurking in the shadows. Greg and Darcy brushed off the feeling, attributing it to the spooky ambiance of the night. They continued to enjoy themselves, laughing and dancing as they made their way through the dimly lit corridors of the ship. As they wandered deeper into the belly of the ship, they stumbled upon a secluded corner where a group of passengers were gathered around a fortune teller, her tent illuminated by flickering candlelight. Intrigued, Greg and Darcy approached the tent, eager to have their fortunes told. The fortune teller, a mysterious woman dressed in flowing robes, welcomed them with a cryptic smile. "Step inside and I will reveal your destiny," she said, her voice low and cryptic. Greg and Darcy exchanged a glance before entering the tent, the heavy scent of incense filling their nostrils. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the air charged with a mysterious energy. The fortune teller motioned for them to sit, her eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light as she gazed into the depths of their souls. "I sense a great darkness surrounding you," she said, her voice echoing in the silence of the tent. "A darkness that threatens to consume you both." Greg and Darcy exchanged a nervous glance, the hairs on the back of their necks standing on end. They had expected a lighthearted Halloween prank, not a dire prediction of doom. "What do you mean?" Darcy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. But before the fortune teller could respond, a sudden gust of wind swept through the tent, extinguishing the candles and plunging them into darkness. In the pitch blackness, Greg and Darcy felt a cold chill run down their spines, a sense of dread gripping their hearts like a vice. They stumbled out of the tent, their hearts pounding in their chests as they searched for the light of the moon. But when they emerged back onto the deck of the ship, they found themselves in a scene straight out of a nightmare. The once vibrant Halloween party had descended into chaos, passengers running in terror as otherworldly creatures attacked them. Greg and Darcy clung to each other, their hearts racing as they tried to make sense of what was happening. But as they looked around, they realized that the creatures used to be the passengers, where almost half the ship became undead creatures. They were real, their eyes filled with a hunger that sent a shiver down Greg and Darcy's spines. Frantic, Greg and Darcy raced through the ship, their only thought to find safety before it was too late. But no matter where they turned, they were met with the same chilling sight, the undead closing in on them with each passing moment. Just when all hope seemed lost, they stumbled upon a door leading to the lower decks of the ship. With no other options left, they flung open the door and descended into the darkness below. The lower decks were deserted, the air heavy with the stench of decay. Greg and Darcy pressed on, their hearts pounding in their chests as they searched for a way to escape the nightmare that had consumed their Halloween vacation. But as they rounded a corner, they came face to face with the captain of the ship, his eyes vacant and lifeless as he lurched towards them with outstretched arms. With a scream, Greg and Darcy turned and fled, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors as they raced towards the safety of the upper decks. But as they reached the top of the stairs, they were met with a sight that froze them in their tracks. The deck was empty. The once bustling party now a ghostly graveyard of abandoned costumes and scattered belongings. In the distance, they could see a lighthouse, a beacon of hope in the darkness. With renewed determination, they raced towards the front of the ship, their only thought to escape the nightmare that had consumed their Halloween vacation. Greg's hand tightened around Darcy's as they dashed toward the front of the ship, their eyes fixed on the distant lighthouse. The ship, once lively and packed with laughter, now creaked and groaned as if it too had been corrupted by the sinister force that had taken hold. Shadows twisted and writhed around them, whispering with unnatural voices. But Greg and Darcy kept moving, their breath ragged and hearts racing. "We have to get off this ship," Greg muttered, pulling Darcy closer as they approached the bow. "Maybe there's a lifeboat we can use. We can't stay here." Darcy nodded, her lips trembling as she cast a glance behind them. The deck was eerily still, though the cold air felt charged with unseen eyes. The creatures, once passengers, seemed to retreat momentarily, leaving the couple in an unsettling silence. "Do you hear that?" Darcy whispered, pausing. Greg stopped and strained his ears. There, beneath the howling wind and distant crash of waves, was a faint rhythmic thumping. It was steady, mechanical, like a heartbeat pulsing through the hull of the ship. "What is that?" Greg asked, his voice low and edged with dread. Darcy shook her head. "It sounds like it's coming from below. Like the engines, maybe?" "Engines don't sound like that." They exchanged a look, uncertainty gnawing at them. The lighthouse beacon continued to cut through the darkness, its rotating light offering fleeting glimpses of safety. But that pulsing noise was growing louder, as if something beneath the surface was stirring. Greg pulled Darcy along, deciding against investigating the sound. But as they reached the edge of the deck, a horrifying realization struck them. All of the lifeboats were gone. They're gone, every single one. Darcy's voice was a mixture of disbelief and terror. Greg's heart sank. He scanned the horizon, but the sea stretched out endlessly, cold and indifferent. The lighthouse was so close, yet unreachable. "We're trapped," Greg said, his voice cracking. The rhythmic thumping grew louder, more insistent, reverberating through the ship like a sickly pulse. It seemed to be following them, growing more intense with each step they took. Darcy's eyes widened. "Greg, we have to get below. We can't stay out here. Something's—" Before Darcy could finish, one of the creatures happened to appear in front of them. After glancing at one another, the creature let out a loud bellow. Then they could hear more bellowing from around the ship. The couple began to run, hoping to get back to their cabin, to hopefully barricade themselves in. As they were heading towards the entrance to the lower deck, could hear a stampede-type sound. "The undead has found them." Greg and Darcy sprinted, their feet pounding against the metal deck as the stampede of undead creatures echoed behind them. The distant lighthouse offered no comfort now, the glimmer of hope it once represented swallowed by the relentless bellowing and thumping that surrounded them. The ship seemed to pulse with life, its walls vibrating with an eerie energy that made escape seem more impossible with every step. "Faster!" Greg urged, his voice trembling with panic as they dodged fallen chairs, overturned tables, and the remnants of the once lively Halloween party now scattered across the ship. Darcy's breath was ragged, her legs burning with fatigue. "We can't outrun them forever, Greg," she gasped. "There has to be another way." "The cabin!" he insisted, tugging her hand as they veered toward the lower deck entrance. The sound of the undead grew louder, closer, the grotesque creatures gaining on them. With a crash, the door to the lower decks burst open and they stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind them. They fumbled for a lock, but the old rusted door had no functioning latch. Greg shoved a nearby metal chair under the handle, bracing it with shaking hands. "That won't hold them for long," Darcy whispered, her wide eyes locked on the door. The rhythmic thumping continued, vibrating through the floor and walls, as if something massive below the ship was stirring, pushing the undead creatures forward. The ship's heartbeat pulsed with an unholy rhythm, keeping time with the monsters that hunted them. "We just need time to think," Greg said, though even as he spoke, he knew time was the one thing they didn't have. The creatures were already slamming into the door, their moans filling the corridor. The chair under the handle creaked with each impact. "We have to get off this ship, Greg," Darcy said desperately. "The lighthouse. There has to be a lifeboat somewhere we missed. Maybe—" Greg's eyes locked onto the floor beneath them. "No," he said slowly, his voice low and hollow. "The sound, that heartbeat, it's coming from below us." Darcy stared at him, dread dawning on her face. "What do you mean?" Greg took her hand again, pulling her towards the floor. "The engine room," he muttered. "Whatever's causing that sound, it's down there. I think it's why everything's gone wrong." "You want to go deeper into the ship?" Darcy asked, her voice rising with fear. "Greg, we need to escape, not get closer to—" "It's our only chance," he said, cutting her off. "If we can stop whatever's down there. Maybe we stop all of this." A deafening crash echoed behind them, and they knew the door wouldn't hold much longer. The creatures were getting through. Darcy squeezed Greg's hand, her fear palpable. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's go." They hurried down the narrow, dimly lit corridors, the smell of decay growing thicker as they ventured deeper into the ship's belly. The thumping grew louder, vibrating through their bones. As they descended a final staircase into the engine room, they were met with a sight that froze them in their tracks. The heart of the ship, the engine room, was not what they expected. Instead of machinery and engines, the room had been overtaken by a sprawling, fleshy mass that pulsated with life. Thick, pulsating tendrils snaked out from a central bloated core, slithering along the walls, the floor, everywhere. "It's alive!" Darcy gasped, her voice trembling. The tendrils undulated with the same rhythm as the ship's heartbeat, and as they stood there, the mass twitched as though sensing their presence. It was ancient, grotesque, and radiating a power that made the air thick with dread. What is it?" Greg breathed. "It's what's controlling the ship," Darcy whispered, stepping closer despite her fear. "It's what's turning the passengers into those creatures." The mass pulsed, and suddenly one of the tendrils lashed out, whipping through the air toward them. Greg grabbed Darcy, pulling her back just in time as the tendril struck the ground where they'd been standing, leaving a slimy trail in its wake. "We need to destroy it," Greg shouted, his voice rising with panic. "It's the source of everything." "But how?" Darcy's mind raced. They had no weapons, no way to fight something so monstrous. The tendrils slithered and writhed around them, sensing their presence, growing more agitated with each passing second. Then Darcy spotted it, a series of large fuel drums stacked against the wall, just beyond the tendrils. "Greg, the fuel!" she yelled, pointing. "If we can ignite it, we might be able to blow this thing up." Greg's eyes widened with understanding. "It's risky, but it might be our only chance." As the tendrils thrashed and lashed out, Greg and Darcy darted toward the fuel drums. They dodged the writhing appendages, narrowly avoiding their deadly strikes. When they reached the drums, Greg quickly fumbled with a lighter he had in his pocket, his hands shaking as he tried to steady his nerves. One of the tendrils whipped toward them, and Darcy shoved Greg out of the way just in time, the slimy appendage missing him by inches. "Hurry!" she cried. Greg finally sparked the lighter. "Run!" he shouted, tossing it toward the fuel drums. They turned and sprinted, their legs burning as they ran toward the exit. Behind them, there was a deafening roar as the fuel ignited. The explosion rocked the ship, and they were thrown to the ground by the force of the blast. The walls shook violently, and the floor beneath them buckled. As they struggled to their feet, smoke filled the corridor, and the ship's heartbeat faltered. The rhythmic thumping grew erratic, weakening with each passing second. The fleshy mass in the engine room writhed in agony, its tendrils thrashing violently as it burned. "We did it," Darcy breathed, coughing through the smoke. "We destroyed it." But their relief was short-lived. From the darkness came the moans of the undead, still shambling toward them despite the creature's destruction. The ship was sinking now, listing dangerously to one side. Water surged in through the cracked hull, flooding the lower decks. "Greg," Darcy whispered, her voice barely audible. "We're not out of this yet." Together, they ran toward the deck, knowing their only chance was to escape before the ship was consumed by the dark sea. But as they reached the top, the lighthouse was no longer visible. The only thing that greeted them was an endless black void.